But what this did was it sent a message to a lot of the drug cartels that Colorado is a place where you can do a lot of business. And now we've seen an explosion of fentanyl in our communities. It went from about 200 overdose deaths to 500 overdose deaths a year, now over 900 last year alone. And the latest numbers I've seen have us on pace for 1,500 plus fentanyl deaths, poisonings in Colorado this year.
This man wants to be the next Attorney General of the great state of Colorado, John Kellner. Thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're the district attorney somewhere in Colorado. Which district?
Yeah, it's the 18th Judicial District. It's somewhere that represents about a fifth of all Coloradans. It's actually Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert,
and Lincoln Counties. This is a huge district.
1.1 million people.
Yeah, over a fifth of Colorado.
Yep.
Help me understand this. I'm sorry, this is a stupid question. I should know this. There are 22 districts, is that right?
That's right.
There's a question to have a 23rd district.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's actually already passed.
It's already passed.
This is happening. The 18th Judicial District, my district, is actually breaking up officially starting January of 2025. You can see Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln Counties break off and form the 23rd Judicial District.
Right.
We've been in the planning process for this for well over a year and a half.
And what's on the ballot this year?
Oh, there's an amendment to the Constitution.
Right.
That'll give the governor the power to appoint the judges for the new 23rd Judicial District. And really it's just an opportunity for the governor to appoint those folks so that we get ahead of the split, because otherwise all of a sudden it springs into legal being, and what's going to happen is you'll have judges who aren't appointed to that district, and we might have a couple weeks where we're missing justice services. So victims are not getting their day in court, defendants are not getting due process. So
how will you be voting on it?
I'm voting yes on that.
All right. Even knowing that maybe it'll be a governor you don't want making those appointments?
They're making the appointments from the current 18th Judicial District judges. See, these are folks that are already in those positions. They're just allocating.
So this is an administrative.
It's very much an administrative.
Got it. All right. Why would you want to become AG? I understand from DA to AG is a pretty natural step, but why?
Yeah, I'm running for Attorney General to turn the tide on our crime wave. There's no two ways about it. Our state's in crisis. I've been talking about this as a DA for a very long time. And when I was elected, I found myself going to the Capitol quite a bit, advocating against many bills that were really pro-offender or pro-criminal in some fashion, or really putting victims behind criminals. And oftentimes I found myself either across the aisle, seeing the Attorney General, our incumbent Democrat Attorney General, on the other side, or just completely absent. When his voice as the state's chief law enforcement official was sorely needed at the Capitol.
Let's talk about crime for a second. This anecdotal stuff. So we're in downtown Denver right now, and this place was beautiful. I mean, I've been in Colorado nearly all my life. I've never felt unsafe in Colorado, really ever, until recently. Mm-hmm. Around our building are needles and vomit and feces and characters who are a danger to themselves and to others. Every day we're calling the police to shoo people off of our property. They were vandalizing it. Called the police the other day. There was a 3-minute wait to get to the police on a 911 call, and it got cut off after that. You had to call again. If you were suffering from a shotgun wound, it would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
I've never seen a crime wave like this. Colorado is number 2 in fentanyl deaths. We're number 1 in automobile thefts. This is not the Colorado I grew up in.
It's not the Colorado that anybody grew up in, unless you're looking 25 years plus in the past. You say anecdotal, but John, if you ask anybody, how do you feel? Do you feel safer today than you did, let's say, 4 years ago? The answer is going to be no. Everybody feels the way you do. I talk to people all over our state. It's not just Denver. But let's talk about Denver a little bit. I mean, we know that there are buildings downtown, businesses that are charging extra tax, essentially a surcharge, to deal with the crime wave that they're basically victims for, right? We're seeing office buildings that remain empty, and it's not because of COVID that everybody doesn't want to come back to work. It's because they don't want to go back to work in a place where they don't feel safe. So it's not anecdotal.
It's
This
funny,
is
funny
everybody.
you mentioned that. In that very seat, had a gentleman who owned a sports apparel store down on the 16th Street Mall. He publicly started charging a 1% crime fee for the amount of crime that was coming through and people just coming in and stealing. I said, really, you just put it on the bill? And he said, oh, 1% doesn't cover it. It should be closer to 5%. But I wanted to make sure that customers understood that there's a cost for this. He said, the real shame was, I can't get employees.
All right.
I want to hire women. I have women in my other stores, but the women don't feel safe in this location. They refuse to come to work. I can't hire women because it's so dangerous in a place that never used to be dangerous.
Yeah, and John, I'll say it's not just women that don't feel safe. I've heard this from all kinds of people all over the state that say they struggle to hire and then keep good employees because, look, if you call 911 or you call the police because somebody just walked into your store and shoplifted a couple $100 worth of goods and walks out, it makes that employee not feel safe.
Right.
I mean, it's natural that you're going to feel unprotected in that space because you think, look, what if it was something much worse than somebody just walking in and stealing things off the shelf? What if it's somebody putting a gun in my face? And frankly, we're number one in the country in Colorado for bank robberies of all things. And the reason why I said earlier that 25 years in the past, nobody felt this way, is that we're at a 25-year high in the violent crime rate across our entire state.
That's incredible. That's just incredible. All right, let me push you on this. So, we have new laws in Colorado. We have laws that decriminalize. I'll use that term. Maybe there's a better term. Loosened.
That's the term.
You think it's the right term for fentanyl? And as soon as that happened, we saw a huge explosion in fentanyl usage. And that someone could carry, what is it now? It's a misdemeanor to have up to, I forget.
Now it's 1 gram, but you're talking about when they made it a misdemeanor to possess 4 grams or under.
And how many people can 4 grams of fentanyl kill?
2,000 if it was pure fentanyl. Because, anybody who listens to this ought to know that 2 milligrams of fentanyl, think about your coffee packet, your NutraSweet, that's 1,000 milligrams. It's 1 gram. So 2 milligrams of that is enough fentanyl to kill somebody. And they made that a misdemeanor to possess that amount. And really what
Not just kill somebody, it could kill
and it has
thousands of people.
And it has killed people. Really what we see is that, it allowed low-level dealers to possess 40, 50 pills because you're under that 4 gram weight and pass themselves off as just simple users. Now look, if police catch that low-level dealer in the act, handing somebody and exchanging money for drugs right then and there, they're going to get arrested and they're going to get charged with possession with intent to distribute. But the reality is you don't catch most of those things happening right in front of you.
You catch a guy who's got a bunch of pills in his pocket and now he can say, they're for me.
Oh, well, right. So that what happened there was they would get a ticket. They'd simply say, well, please show up in court in the next 30 to 45 days for your court appearance. And guess what? Not all the time would they show up and face accountability. But what this did was it sent a message to a lot of the drug cartels that Colorado is a place where you can do a lot of business. And now we've seen an explosion of fentanyl in our communities. It went from about 200 overdose deaths to 500 overdose deaths a year, now over 900 last year alone. And the latest numbers I've seen have us on pace for 1,500 plus fentanyl deaths, poisonings in Colorado this year.
What has that got to do with our current AG?
So much.
How so?
So a couple things the AG can do. As district attorney, what I have accomplished is that I use my local grand jury to go after the fentanyl traffickers. We're talking about my 4 counties. And what I do is I use the grand jury to do these complex investigations. We have seized hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of fentanyl pills from these fentanyl traffickers. We've indicted dozens of Mexican drug cartel folks. We've seized 28 firearms from these people and hand grenades as well. Hand grenades and body armor.
Where do they get hand grenades?
Haven't figured that one out yet. But bottom line is, this is dangerous business, and it's invited dangerous people to do that here in Colorado. So I've done that locally with my grand jury. The Attorney General has access to the statewide grand jury, has the ability to do what I do, but on a much broader scale, and to tackle this crisis with a holistic view of the entire state. Because I'll tell you, the people that we might indict locally are also probably peddling this poison or associated with somebody, let's say, in Mesa County. And we need that sort of overarching view from somebody at the top to be able to tackle it. But that's local, right? So, just there, you're trying to do something on the enforcement side. That's one piece of it. But you might wonder about where was the Attorney General in 2019 when the legislature was debating decriminalizing the possession of fentanyl and making it a misdemeanor. You would expect the chief law enforcement official for the state to show up, maybe say a word of caution, maybe urge the legislators not to do this because it's going to have a terrible effect on our state. But he didn't show up. Our current AG did not take a stand. And when I pushed him on this in a debate, he simply said he didn't know it was going to be the crisis that it is now. Well, people in law enforcement like me, we knew, and we were urging them not to do it. But we needed the voice, and frankly, the legislature needed the voice of its chief law enforcement official to say, don't do this. Instead, we've got the current crisis, and now we've got to pick up the pieces.
Phil Weiser is a remarkably affable guy. Every time I meet him, have a nice conversation. I've enjoyed his company. He's been a law professor. And so a lot of this has been theory to him, not reality. And so for the last 4 years, he's been chasing some interesting cases. The job of AG is, top law enforcement. He's also the lawyer for the state. Mm-hmm. Some people think he's a lawyer for the state government. No, he's the lawyer for me because we hire him, which means he's supposed to represent my interests. And I worry about that. I worry about a guy who had no experience in this. Where do you think he has failed the most?
Well, it's definitely on the crime front. Like you mentioned, he's the legal advisor for the state. He's the legal advisor and the representative for the Colorado State Patrol, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Public Safety, the Parole Board. And my goodness, that's been a complete mess because we're continuing to see people released on discretionary and early parole that go on to commit more and more crime and victimize people in our communities. You have a tremendous ability to influence the public safety trajectory of our state as the Attorney General. That's what I'm going to do. And there's other things that concern me, particularly on the waterfront, for instance. If you go back a few years, there was really an overreach, in my view, by the federal government when it came to the waters of the United States. And they were really trying to kind of grab a lot of the personal property rights, to include those of belonging to Coloradans and their water rights.
Let me see if I can get ahead of this, because this one fascinated me. So there was a time in America that we got around by using waterways. Mississippi was a great big highway. Rivers were great big highways. Canals were highways. But then sometimes you have these streams that during a runoff, maybe you could get a canoe up, but no other time. And then the federal government said, no, they're under our jurisdiction as well. And that little feeder pond up there that, 1 week a year gets some water, that's ours too. Mm-hmm. That was an incredible regulatory taking all over the country.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We called it waterways. Anything you can put 1 foot on one side of the water and a foot on the other side of the water really shouldn't be a waterway.
John, I've heard folks say that Bureau of Reclamation says that if you were to pour this water cup out on the ground, that is the waters of the United States, because ultimately it's going to seep into the ground. It's going to get somewhere someday that connects to navigable water. And we see that right now. And the reason why this matters for a lot of folks in our state, we're talking about farmers, ranchers, these ag producers that need to have regulatory certainty when it comes to their water and their property rights. And what they're concerned about is sort of overreach by the federal government saying, well, hey, look, you want to dig a ditch over here on your property and move some of your water around, well, you've got to ask the EPA for permission to do that. And this is really where the waters of the United States overreach comes into play. And Phil Weiser actually has supported the EPA having more control over things like intermittent streams and dry arroyos, these places where they are not connected to navigable waters of the United States, but to have that control by the federal government. And frankly, it happened last week too. Last week there was a case before the United States Supreme Court as Sackett v. EPA. And this is a family who bought property out in Idaho, the Sacketts. They wanted to build a 3-bedroom house. Right. Have you heard about this?
I have. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, so what happens here is they start building, and all of a sudden the EPA comes in and says, whoa, you can't do that. You're on wetlands. And of course, they're on property that's a lot more like solid, hard ground than wetlands. And they said, well, look, at times, your property is going to get very wet, and that water runs off under a street into a ditch, which feeds into an unnamed stream that goes to a creek that goes to a lake that is waters of the United States. And
by this logic, because you could spit on somebody's property, the EPA has the ability to control it.
We got to worry about them, maybe regulating the water in a pothole out here in Colorado, and we got a ton of those. So that's a concern for all ag producers out here, farmers and ranchers, anybody really that has an interest in water and property rights, because you don't want to see that overreach by the federal government. We've had a system in place in Colorado for well over 100 years that adjudicates our property and our water disputes, and we need to stick to that. We want Colorado making decisions about our water.
I guarantee you 99 out of 100 voters don't think about that. I think about that because I'm a geek. You think about that because you're a DA. But to protect Colorado's water rights, it goes up to the AG's office as well. Talk to me a little bit about the day-to-day workings of the AG. It is different than a DA. And that a DA, your job is to put bad guys behind bars. And
to rehabilitate them too. I mean, we don't just put everybody behind bars, right? We're trying to make sure.
Do you?
Oh yeah. I mean, most of our results in our cases are rehabilitative. We're trying to get people off that path and onto the right path. You're never going to incarcerate your way out of all your problems, that's for sure. What we do want to see...
But you can incarcerate your way out of a lot of problems. Yeah. And what I'm seeing in Colorado right now is because we don't incarcerate enough people.
Agreed.
One of the great things about somebody behind bars is they're not going to steal my car.
Yeah. Repeat offenders, violent criminals, that's where they belong.
It was funny, we were trying to get rid of somebody who was vandalizing our property, and cops came, and it's like, shoot him away. I said, why don't you just arrest him? I said, the cop looked at me, and he said, yesterday I arrested a guy who stole 5 cars.
Mm-hmm.
An hour later, he was back out on the streets. I had to arrest him again for still stealing cars.
Yeah.
He was out within an hour and out on either
the
PR bond.
Or $1 bonds.
Right. And it's amazing. And I could see in the cop's eyes this look of why?
It's
why am I getting up in the morning, risking my life? Why am I doing this to try to protect people if DAs and judges and the laws are just wiping away what I do? Yeah. Why am I arresting this guy so I can see him again later on in the afternoon?
It's incredibly demoralizing. Yeah. And let me tell you a little bit of a different way that we do it in the 18th Judicial District. So we actually have the lowest rates of car theft in Arapahoe and Douglas County for the entire Denver metro area.
It's because you guys are not good at it, that's all.
Well, what we do is we actually put people who are these repeat offenders into prison. The Denver Gazette ran a story a couple months ago kind of chronicling one of these people that had committed 4 car thefts in Denver over the span of about 2 months. Had gotten PR bond and PR bond and $1 bond, all these extra victims that should not have been there. And let me tell you, if you catch somebody for stealing 4 cars, they probably stole 20. So that guy came down, stole a car in my district. He was arrested, he was kept in jail, and he was sentenced to prison where he belongs, so he cannot hurt more people. And 9 News covered a similar story about folks that were doing that at DIA. So over at the airport, repeat car thieves arrested and released, came down to my district, stole a car, sentenced to prison where he belonged. So we try to do it a little differently. You don't see as many PR bonds coming out of our district as you do with some other places.
Does the state AG have anything to do with PR bonds?
So judges set bonds, right? That's the bottom line. What the AG has a role in doing is having the bully pulpit, being the sole voice that can stand up and say, look, we got to address this problem because we are seeing the car theft crisis in our state. It's not one district. I mean, heck, 60% of the people who steal cars in my district don't live there. Right? This is a sort of regional issue, and it's certainly a statewide issue. So having the Attorney General that knows about prosecution, has actually been in a courtroom and worked with law enforcement, going to the legislature and saying, look, we need your help. We need you to pass a bill, make some law that actually prevents these sort of catch and release policies. Instead, John, and this is pretty terrible, Phil Weiser supported Senate Bill 62 last year. Now, this bill was a bill that said you could not arrest people for class 4, 5, and 6 felonies and drug felony level 3 and 4. That's most drug deals, by the way, and it's pretty much all car thefts. This bill said you couldn't arrest them, you got to give them a summons. If somebody was arrested, guess what? Practically certain to get a PR bond, and they didn't have to show up in court 3 times. I know your head's about to explode.
Yeah, help me out with this one.
Yeah, you don't have to show up in court 3 times before a judge can issue a cash bond. So you might get the jury summons that says show up in court, to sit in judgment essentially of a fellow citizen, but the defendant doesn't have to show up, and there weren't consequences. He actively supported that bill. He was number one on the masthead essentially as the state's chief law enforcement official, saying this is something we need for our state.
Under what type of logic? As you know, we've invited him. I'm glad you decided to come. He didn't, but
Well, I hope he changes his mind and actually comes and answers that question. That bill was so toxic and so extreme. Every law enforcement person out there, chief of police and sheriff, rallied against it. It was so bad. It was actually withdrawn by Senator Pete Lee from Colorado Springs. All right, but that is the kind of bill that I worry that if he were reelected, he's going to be out backing again, and we're going to see that become law in our state.
And you were also talking about the legal advice he gives to, was it the state troopers?
Yeah, State Patrol.
And State Patrol and the parole board. I didn't know he was the lawyer for the parole board. Mm-hmm. What's his job there?
Well, they got to give legal advice on whether or not parole is lawful under certain circumstances. They're obviously not deciding whether or not parole is granted by somebody. That's going to be hopefully a governor appointing a parole board that's going to have a bit of a tighter rein on releasing people, not based off of time served, but on whether or not they're rehabilitated. That's really the metric that we should be looking for. And how I know it's not working, John, is that about 50% of the people released from prison in our state are back in prison within 3 years. That tells me we got a system that is not working top to bottom.
Your opponent is remarkably well-funded. He's been very popular. Money is coming in from around the country. He seems very, very popular outside of the state of Colorado. How in the world do you compete with that?
Well, he's got a record. That's a problem for him right now. He's got a record, and it's pretty terrible. One of these debates actually pushed him on acknowledging that he's the state's chief law enforcement official, and this is remarkable. He would not acknowledge that, despite the fact that all of his job applications go out and say, "Come work for me. I'm Phil Weiser, the state's chief law enforcement official." Instead, he said, "I'm more like a coach for the state and for law enforcement." Well, look, if you are number one in the country for car theft and number one for bank robberies and number 2 for the highest rate of fentanyl death, overdoses, 25-year violent crime high in our state, well, coach, your team is losing by a lot. And coaches are losing that bad get fired.
Even the CU Buffs fired their head coach mid-season because he was doing that badly.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is still going to be a tough year. I keep hearing about a red wave. Red waves have a way of somehow washing around Colorado instead of over Colorado. It used to be in Colorado, the governor's office might go this way, but the other constitutional offices would go a different way. Or maybe the Senate seat would go this way and the governor's office would go to the other party. That hasn't been the case that much any longer.
Well, really only in 2018. Go back before that, we still had a lot of ticket splitting in Colorado.
It is. I wonder if the demographics of the state have really changed. I mean, the issue that there are two issues. There are just two issues. I don't care where you go in Colorado. There are two issues. Colorado is number one in the country for inflation. The Congressional Budget Office puts it at 15.5%. 15.5% highest inflation rate in the country is right here. Fortunately, we have the highest car theft rates too, which gets to issue number two, which is crime.
Right.
So the things that we are doing policy-wise are not working in this state. And if those are the things that push people, Republicans will have a great year. However, the Roe versus Wade decision was overturned.
Sure.
And that seems to be the Hail Mary pass that the left has been waiting for, that they're holding on to, that if you vote for Republican, any Republican, what they're going to do is they're going to use this to outlaw it nationwide. Here in Colorado, we have perhaps the most lenient abortion laws in the nation. Right up to the moment of birth, it is completely legal. Does the AG's office, what is the overlap on abortion and the AG's office?
The AG's job is to defend the law of the state of Colorado. That includes the Reproductive Health Equity Act, which I pledged as Attorney General because I support the rule of law. I will absolutely uphold and protect that law from legal challenge. So when people say that, abortion is on the ballot, that's just not true when it comes to the Attorney General's race. It's not true at all. And I know there's a lot of fear-mongering going on out there, but that's just not true.
Why is it not true? You're the AG. You probably, I don't know what your personal feelings are on abortion. If you want to share them, go ahead. But as AG, will you defend the laws in Colorado?
Absolutely. 100%. It's not about the law according to John Kellner. It's not, do I love this law or hate this law? You defend them all. That's the job. And I spent a lot of time in the Marine Corps and a lot of time overseas in places like Afghanistan, where you don't have the rule of law. You don't have the expectation that people in positions of power in government are going to follow the law. It's maybe who's grifting the most or who's got the most powerful friends or the biggest guns. That's the recipe for a failed state. And that's not the America that I know and love. And so I'm committed to the rule of law. That's my North Star. So it doesn't matter what that law is. I'm going to defend it. And with every ounce that I have, every bit of legal talent that I have, and my office will do the same. That's the job.
Reminds me of a good friend of mine, Gail Norton, the former AG of Colorado, former Secretary of the Interior for U.S. She did not like Amendment 2, which was passed, I think, in 1992, which was to make sure that homosexuals don't have certain special rights. It passed, went all the way to the Supreme Court. She had to defend this law she did not agree with, and she defended it to the best of her abilities. That's the job of AG.
Well, I actually was in a debate with Phil not long ago where he mentioned he hates Tabor. He does not like Tabor, right? But he has to defend it when it's challenged because that's the law, right? So you should expect that from anybody who wants to be your attorney. They're going to zealously advocate for you, and that's what I'm running for, to be Colorado's attorney.
People want to get some more information, where do they go?
Love to have anybody go to our website. It's johnkellner.com, JohnKellner.com. Love to have any support that people want to throw our way. They can volunteer and learn more about the campaign. We are surging towards the finish line and need all the support we can get.
And when you win, you can get me out of parking tickets?
Nope, no special favors, my friend.
Speeding tickets?
That's still probably not going to happen. Keep trying.
So what the hell was all this about?
I thought you just enjoyed my company.
Rarely. John, thanks so much. Best of luck.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.